Go for it. Well, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this Northern Southeast Alaska Delegation Town Hall. I am Jesse Keel. It's my privilege to serve the northern part of Southeast, Juneau, Gustavus, Haines, Klukwan, and Skagway in the Alaska State Senate. And I'm joined tonight by our two representatives, Representative Andy Story and Representative Sarah Hannon. This is our regular mid-session town hall, and we're so glad that folks can join us tonight on various internet platforms. We're glad to have you with us. So we wanted to start out tonight with a little bit of a briefer, a little bit of an update on some of the big issues that are in front of the legislature, where they stand, what the prospects are, and then we'll get to questions and answers. We really want the opportunity to have a conversation with you. So I will just kick it off a little bit here, talk just a little bit about some of the issues from a Senate perspective, and then we can hand it over to the representatives. I wanted to start a little bit. We talk many times about a fiscal plan for the state of Alaska, our long-term fiscal future, and a stable footing for future generations of Alaskans to build on and to grow our state into the future. The prospects for a fiscal plan are a little bit diminished this year because there's cash around. High price of oil because of a number of issues, including most recently the terrible situation in Ukraine, has filled the state of Alaska's coffers. And it looks like that price of oil will stay up for many months to come and really affect our income. That makes it tough to make some of the difficult choices for the long term that would stabilize Alaska's fiscal situation. Not to put too fine a point on it, nobody wants to do anything that would be a little bit unpopular when there's cash around and you don't absolutely have to. Unfortunately, that means that it seems likely that we'll be getting close to the crisis point again before we look at some of the big picture fiscal fixes, stabilizing the permanent fund dividend question, protecting the permanent fund in the long run from any overdraws, the question of a spending cap, a broad-based tax or other revenue measures, adjustments to our oil taxes, the things that Alaska needs really to get off the roller coaster that we've been on financially. At the same time that we talk about those issues, and we have some cash to pay our bills this year, we are also looking still at the federal infrastructure bill and all the money that's coming to Alaska for any number of important needs. That bipartisan federal infrastructure law is going to put tremendous amounts of money into investments in things like broadband, especially for remote and rural Alaska, into our roads and bridges, a great influx of funding to our ferry system that really will give us an opportunity to renew and to retool and to build a more efficient and more stable future for the marine highway system. And so we are continuing to work as we look at the state budget and get a better understanding of that very large piece of federal law, continuing to work on where that money goes and how we make the best use of it for Alaska's long-term future. That also plays in a little bit with our capital budget. Very little of the federal infrastructure money will come directly through the legislature that we'll appropriate through the capital budget. But because there is some state money, we have an opportunity to provide match for some capital projects, for some federal infrastructure projects, as well as to make some significant investments in things that the infrastructure bill doesn't fund. The state of Alaska, the University of Alaska, our schools have a lot of deferred maintenance through the last 5 or 6 years of budget cutting. We've been deferring roofs and wall repairs and leaks and boilers and the things that just have to get done to protect a structure and keep using it for future decades. The infrastructure law has almost no money for that kind of vertical infrastructure, and so we'll be working to get significant investment in repairing existing schools, fixing existing state buildings, as well as other possible investments in our future. With that, I know I've talked for quite a while. We have a lot of topics that we can bring you up to speed on, and then we want to get to your questions. So let me hand it over for a couple of other topics to the representatives. Who'd like to take it next?
I can go. Welcome everyone tonight. We're really glad that you've come to visit with us for a little bit, and I must say that I am looking forward to hearing your questions and comments on the session. We are midway in the session, and I am happy to say that since I've been serving, and again representing District 34 out in the Valley, this is the first year that we have had some revenue and not looking at tremendous budget cuts. And I find that that has its own tension in itself, because we have had downward pressure on our budget the last few years, so there's many needs. The infrastructure package, which we are thrilled about, does have limitations, very much so, on certain items that we can fund and not fund. But overall, we are in a much better situation that we have been in, but we want to protect that situation and move really wisely. So I would say there's lots of conversations going on now about how to best move forward with the budget. It's a good time to call and check in with our offices and let us know your priorities, and that's one of the reasons why we're gathering together tonight. I did want to update a little bit on the House side. Our operating budgets are being, our operating budget amendments are being heard in House Finance Committee this week. We expect the full budget on the House floor next week, and that is always a long process, and we will probably have long floor sessions. What we have been having long floor sessions this week, and looking at every bill has plenty of amendments, and so we are working hard. When I have to talk about my hopes for this session, I really want to always protect the permanent fund. I think with that, we've gotten that message loud and clear from Alaskans, and we're hearing it from our colleagues across the state that we're all working in this body. I think we've really grown to come to that place that we don't want to overdraw the permanent fund, and because of our new oil revenues, that is looking well. I did want to say that the price of oil, well, it's been high. It's moved around some. Our permanent fund has dropped $3 billion from 83 million to 80 because our investment funds have gone down. And so at least the last time I looked, that's where the numbers that we were seeing. And so while we have more oil money, we have to remember that the investment funds the stock market has gone down. And so there's always this balancing act that we're looking for good information on. I would have to say my hopes for this session are that we really come through for our children's education, that we put some money inside the base student allocation. It's been 6 years since we have done an increase for our students' education, and it's put a lot of downward pressure on the budget. Our fixed costs have been going up for schools, cost of fuel, cost of property insurance. We had wonderful testimony from our very own superintendent, Bridget Weiss, at one of our education committee meetings, talking about just our property insurance alone has gone up $500,000 over a spread of 4 years. And so there's downward pressure, and to put the money inside the base student allocation rather than one-time funds allows our districts to plan with certainty that that money will be there next year. And many of you know we start our budget process in the fall, and the budget has to be to the city by March. And so we oftentimes don't know the number we're going to be giving to schools till April, May. And so it really gives a lot of anxiety to our school board members, our teachers, families, about what we can afford to keep offering. So it's smart planning to have all policymakers working together, and how we fund our budgets and the timing of them. Really, we have the power to make the system much more smooth. So I'm really advocating for that, and I know a lot of people are. It's always a passion of mine, so I like to talk about that. I did want to mention teacher retirement and retention, and Senator Keel might want to talk about just retirement benefits a little bit later, but that is just a really key push that we need. We've had across the state lots of teacher turnover, and it's very important for people, the relationships their community has with their teachers. As we know, we have had the benefit of having teachers, many of them serving decades for us, and it's great for our kids and their expertise, but it is also so great for instruction. And we put a lot of training into our teachers, and it's really important that we are able to keep them and can plan well. I wanted to say one more thing about education before I move on, and that is I'm carrying a bill to modernize our Alaska Performance Scholarship, which is the scholarship that all of our kids across the state, if they take a certain rigorous curriculum, get a certain GPA, they have some funds to go to the our university system here and some of our career tech programs here. Wonderful program to have. And so there we had a study. It's been running for 10 years now. The McKinley Research Group did a study asking us to look at updating a few components. And one of the components is increasing the amount of the award. The average cost of going to the university in the state of Alaska is $9,600. And the highest award amount is $4,500. This amount would increase to $7,000, and the good news is that this amount is sustainable through the Higher Education Investment Fund, which is actually another important piece of education information, and that fund was swept last year, and there is a bill to make sure those monies go back into the Higher Education Investment Fund because the Department of Revenue has really high earnings. I think it was like 28% last year. And so in the general fund where the funds were swept to, it's only 2% earnings. And that 28% makes enough revenue from the interest, just like our permanent fund makes us tremendous interest, to pay for our medical doctor programs, WWAMI, for these APS scholarships, and for our Alaska education loans, which have to do based on financial need. So that we've been talking about this being an education session and really trying to prioritize education. And in the budget, there's hopes that we can forward fund education too. So we're really trying to look at what our families have asked for, what businesses ask for. They want to have strong schools here, really connects people and anchors them to the state of Alaska. So I wanted to start out too mentioning Ukraine. Our hearts have been really heavy here on the situation that we see unfolding. When I talk about our kids, my thoughts went to Ukraine because I think of so much the families that I have seen, devastating loss of life. And so we have had a few, what would I call, very moving moments on the floor. We had a sense of the House in the House of Representatives, brought forward by Representative Nelson, who serves in the military and also serves in the state house, and just a sense of the House to say aggression must stop immediately, working forwards with economic sanctions. And there are a couple bills in the House that have been coming forward. Two bills, actually. A governor has a bill on divesting from Ukraine, and State Affairs, Jonathan Christ-Tompkins, has a bill. And so we are working on those right now. In fact, we reviewed a couple of them today in State Affairs. And I'm so proud that many of us are rallying in defense of a free and democratic country and life to live. And I also wanted to mention that there is a community outpouring of support at the Juneau World Affairs Council, and Clinton and Haida Central Council is joining with a group called Juneau Citizens Stand with Ukraine. and they are having a gathering at 6 p.m. on Friday night with a Ukrainian dinner and Ukrainian music, and there are tickets available through the Jack. We don't normally plug a fundraising dinner, so to speak. This is for the children of Ukraine, done through UNICEF. But we all know that our hearts and minds have been there with those families. And there was a rally a couple weeks ago on the Capitol steps, bipartisan. President Machicki was there, Rep. Rivak, who's served in the military, Senator Rivak, just lots of legislators and senators on the steps. Just really important. So I am going to really stop there right now because I've been talking quite a bit, but look forward to more topics coming up. Thank you.
You want to give the number to call in? So as we transition to Representative Story, I'll just give you the telephone number so you can call in with questions or comments, and you can call in while Representative Hannan is talking. If you're in Juneau, the number is 586-9085. If your phone is outside of Juneau, it's 844-586-9085. And we'll be able to chat when the initial update is through. Representative Hannan, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Representative Sarah Hannan, House District 33 currently, which is from Lemon Creek to Thane, Douglas Island, and then the outer parts of the Senate district that Senator Keel described. So that's our Lynn Canal neighbors in Haines and Cluckwan and Skagway, and our neighbors to the west in Gustavus. So northern, southeast, mainland communities, but we include Douglas Island. I serve on the Transportation Committee where, for the first time in several years, we have a bright light on the Alaska Marine Highway System. So one of the pots of money that's coming to us through the federal infrastructure bill is specifically for ferry systems. And we are anticipating that the state of Alaska is going to get about $150 million out of the $200 million allocated in that. And that we expect we will get it annually for 5 years. And that is going to give us more money to operate the Alaska Marine Highway System than we've had for the last 4 years. It will also allow us, what we are attempting to create with a bill, is create a fund to collect revenues. It's called fare box recovery. So when you pay to go on the Alaska Marine Highway System, the money that you are paying, that we'll be able to hold on to that and roll that over for expanded operations and or investment in new vessels. All of the Alaska Marine Highway System, no, let me take that back. We have 2 Alaska class ferries that are new. But besides that, our mainline ferries are all aged. And we are currently the Tustamina that serves Prince William Sound and Western Alaska out the Aleutian Chain is under the process of design for build. But we know that we need at least one more mainline ferry here in Southeast, and we need 2. We need 1 now, and we need 2 in the next few years. So we are hoping to be able to set up the fund, to be able to build it up, to be able to invest more money. And after so many years of cuts, we've got a little bright spot there in the Alaska Marine Highway System. Because one of the other things we did last year was we forward funded a half a year of the Alaska Marine Highway System so we funded it for 18 months to put it on a calendar year planning cycle. Previously, its operational budget, like all state agency budgets, ran July through June, which meant that in the middle of the summer season, the Alaska Marine Highway System found out in how much money they were going to have to operate in July, and they would know in May, which is a very challenging way to do a system that has really different demands summer to winter. What that means for our neighbors and friends right now is that the Alaska Marine Highway System is already planning for the fall season. And as opposed to publishing a schedule and having very little flexibility with only a month or 6 weeks lead time before it's implemented. If you are a community leader or you know of a significant event in your community, you're a school district and you know when your sports tournaments are going to be or when the Art Fest is going to be, communicating that to the Alaska Marine Highway System as they build the schedule for next winter, as opposed to having to adjust and see if they can meet your demand needs. Because we know that Alaskans need the Alaska Marine Highway System year-round, but especially in the winter. That's when our community's truly dependent on it, when the weather is not flyable, when there's far fewer private vessels able to operate. That's when our school groups use it. That's when shipping options are much more limited. So that's a bright spot for us. I also serve on the Legislative Council. I am the chair of that committee. And depending on when you last tuned in with us, the Legislative Council is the administrative arm of the legislature. And in the last year, we've had 2 amazing gifts from the Juneau Community Foundation gifted to the legislature. One is a building. The Assembly Building in downtown Juneau, just across from us on 4th Street, was gifted to us, and the plan is for that to be renovated into legislative housing. As you know, many times when people are critical of the capital city being here, one of the things that they can turn to is talk about the difficulty of finding housing, especially in a special session if it's in the summer and hotel prices or bookings are just not available. But we have a plan to restore that building to what it originally was, which was apartments when it was built in the 1930s. And we are well underway and working with local architecture firm on those design, and totally grateful to the Juneau Community Foundation. The Juneau Community Foundation also purchased the art collection, the Alaskana art collection from the Baranoff Hotel. That hotel is going through a renovation and changing themes of their decor, but they had a collection of Ziegler's and one Sidney Lawrence and a couple other artists, and that art collection was purchased and again donated to the legislature. That art is being installed around the Capitol building to be on permanent display for Alaskans to be able to see and enjoy. And if you've not been to the Capitol building in the last half dozen years, the art collection that's been building slowly and steadily is truly stunning. And we are very thankful to the Juneau Community Foundation for those contributions to continuing to improve the Capitol complex and be a welcoming host to the people that come to visit the capital city from far and wide across Alaska. Wanted to talk briefly also about campaign finance limits. It's a little bit inside baseball, but if you pay attention, you will probably know, or maybe you know, there's an organization called the Alaska Political Offices Commission. So we'll use that term APOC. Last year, there was a court challenge about the campaign donation restrictions that the Alaska legislature had. Our statute had said that an individual could only donate $500. A political action committee could donate $1,000. And these were annual donations to candidates and elected for campaigns. Those were thrown out in a court decision last fall. And APOC's board did not decide they needed enough votes to place an additional limit. Those were thrown out in the fall. So since late fall, there has been no campaign donation limits for Alaskan politicians. And right now, they are unlimited. Working its way through the legislature is a bill that has passed the House that would restore a limit. It would shift one thing different. Instead of there being annual limits, using the term campaign cycle, which is 18 months roughly from when you can declare to run for a seat until the election is held, that would place a $2,000 limit per campaign cycle for legislative races, and would restrict that no more than 25% of your total campaign donations could come from out of state, non-Alaskans. The point of each, the price point at each of those decisions is, to me, less significant than having a limit. In the House, we spent a quite bit of time arguing about where that dollar value should be and whether they should be annual or cycle, and goodness knows, politicians talking about money. That is how they run their races. We could spend hours on it. But suffice to say, I know that our entire delegation supports there being limits in statute. And now that that bill has gone to the Senate, we will depend on Senator Keel keeping a lid on how much you can contribute to elections in Alaska. And I will just highlight one other thing from the budget. Representative Story mentioned that for the first time in a long time, we are talking about things to put into the budget. I referenced and talked about our ferry system getting federal money. But one of the things that we are looking at that's a growing industry in our region is money to the university for a mariculture program. And so that is an ad, and it's one of those strange things. It's University of Alaska Fairbanks, but located here at UAS, to stand up a brand new, first time that the university's done it, and the university has had dramatic cuts to their operational budget over the last half dozen years. But that would truly be a benefit for the seeding of an industry that is at its infancy, and we want to make sure that the science that best supports that's being done here in Alaska. And Representative Story was the prime sponsor of a piece of legislation to help the mariculture industry last year. But it is one of those things when we are putting money into the operational budget where there's been some drastic holes created, we know that it's not just money where it used to be in the exact same way. Some of those are going to be very innovative dollars that we believe will stimulate the economy over the next decade or two. And with that, Senator, are we ready for questions?
I think we are, yeah. So I'll give the number again before we go to the first caller we have on the line. If you'd like to call in and join us, ask a question or give us your comments, the number for a Juneau-based phone is 586-9085. If you're joining us from anywhere outside of Juneau, 844-586-9085. So with that, we do have a caller on the line, Katie Boats. Katie, if you will go ahead, welcome.
Good evening, Senator and both Representative Hannon and Senator Keel. It's Katie Boats. I actually have a few things that I try to limit. I've noticed on the House floor, it has been stalled a great amount of time, and I've also where multiples of representatives on the House floors are really annoyed, and so am I as a constituent, because I know it's stolen valuable time that both representatives could have either with constituents or prepping with other meetings or what have you, just taking up valuable time, right? If the Representative Eastman on his stupid citation dilemma problem. And I was wondering if I may give a suggestion to both representatives, is to see if the House leadership could respectfully ask Representative Eastman to be removed from the chambers before citations even begin from here on out, just so that valuable time is not being taken up anymore.
Thank you. Katie, I hear your frustration. I feel your frustration. But if you recall, one of the lines I always used in my government class is democracy by design is slow. And as much as I am frustrated by members, the fundamental basis of it is that an elected member has the right to be there and participate. There is absolutely no way, short of removal for cause, and being disruptive or deleterious is not cause, to remove a member, duly elected member, from the chambers. And as you know, with that particular representative that you're referencing, there was discussion earlier in the session about where was the cause legally on other things, but you happen to be present today where I would say many members felt a line was crossed about the tradition and practice of the legislature in writing basically in memoriam citations, where they are written for families, usually in consultation with families, and whether I would have attended your memorial or participated in your memorial, both the politics and the politeness have been, we defer to the sponsor of an in memoriam citation for what is said in it. And I know that you heard some of the passionate words from members across the broadest spectrum of Alaskan political views, that the actions that were attempted to be taken today to amend a memoriam citation on the floor, we tabled the amendment and we voted on it, and 2 people voted against it, and there's, I believe you will continue to do that. That does not reach the grounds, nor is it a rule that even I could support, because it is his right to be disrespectful. And that's the pleasure of democracy and the downside of democracy. The blessing of free speech is sometimes speech is offensive. And I wish it wasn't, but that's what we get in an open, free speech, democratic society.
Fair enough. And if I may just ask one more thing. I know each of you are busy and everything, and I've been dealing with my own drama with not my own frustration of not getting a bill passed, particularly House Bill 5. But if there any piece of legislation that each of you would like to email me where you would like to see support for your legislation, from here on out, I'm more than willing to write an email of support for your guys' legislation.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. And I think we can each get back to you. Maybe it's a good time to take just a minute and mention some of the legislation that we're working on. I'll actually start with a bill that isn't mine. Sitting on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the governor has introduced a couple of different crime bills. And Katie, you mentioned House Bill 5, which is the definition of consent for purposes of our laws that govern sexual assault, that talk about rape. And that's Representative Garen Tarr's bill. One of the bills we've worked on in the Senate Judiciary Committee came to us from the governor as a bill to deal with some forms of harassment. They didn't rise to the level of sexual assault, but they did have an inappropriate touching element to them. And we put in a lot of time and work on the Senate Judiciary Committee in an unusually collaborative way, a really bipartisan way. And And we were very fortunate to have a different tenor, a different tone, a lot more cooperation and constructive work with the Department of Law on this bill. And we changed it to still address the issue the governor brought to us, which is what happens if somebody touches other people deliberately, inappropriately, in ways that are serious but don't rise to the level of what we think of as sexual assault. And the bill addresses that. It also takes almost every single element of House Bill 5 and puts that into our sexual assault statutes. And the most important thing for folks to understand about that is that before this bill passes, the way the law reads today, it isn't rape unless there's force or the threat of force. Just saying no isn't enough to make that the crime of rape. And that's inappropriate. So with Representative Tarr's definition of consent, there actually has to be consent. Otherwise, it does come into that realm of sexual assault. And we deal with that very carefully, right? Because you can see there are potential pitfalls there. But the way the bill left the Senate Judiciary Committee, I think, is very balanced. The prosecutors at the Department of Law think it is good language that they can work with to address situations where there weren't weapons or bruising, but there was not consent. And that, if we can get that passed this year, will be a huge step forward. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I think that's an opportunity for the whole legislature to really make an important change in Alaska's laws. Did either of you two want to talk about a piece of legislation or two?
I am happy to mention that I am still hopeful that House Bill 110, which is a tax on vape nicotine products and increasing the age of consumption of nicotine products in Alaska to age 21. We've still got our fingers crossed that it can make it across the finish line. That bill itself remains in the House Finance Committee. The Senate companion is moving this week, and both the Senate version and the House version, we are hopeful that we're going to see that continue to be talked about. You've got a big ticket one, Representative Story.
I think Rep. Hannon is thinking about the BSA bill, which is an increase to the base student allocation of $232, which is a $57 million lift. But when you think about, when it was $800 million in new revenue, $57 million was 7%. And I thought we could afford an increase of 7% for our children. Now the estimate is $1.2 billion. And so I'm really hoping that we will invest that more in our kids. And it is a 2-year bill, so it sets the intention for funding the second year, just of what I talked about when we opened up the meeting, how important it is to do 2 years of funding for school, just like Rep. Hannon talked about forward funding the ferry. There are just some policies that make so much sense for good operations. I did want to take the time to talk about House Bill 292, Home and Community-Based Waivers, which is very important. We've seen an increased demand for home care services for our senior population and those with disabilities. And there's been increasing waiting periods to access these home and community-based care services. So this bill takes steps to make sure that Alaskans who need in-home care receive it. It ensures that there is the reassessment has to be done every 2 years, not annually. Makes it easier for eligible caregivers to become personal care attendants, which is so critically important. And we do have a budget amendment to increase the rate of pay for direct service providers for children who need, and adults with disabilities who need more help. So that is just near and dear to my heart, and I know it is to many of you here. So I did not sponsor that, but I am really hoping that that is successful this year.
And I'm just going to cheat and add one more bill on the back end, and that is a bill that Representative Hannon has in the House and I have in the Senate to deal with a group of chemicals called PFAS. They're very effective firefighting chemicals. They're also extremely bad for you. And so we have legislation that would stop new spraying of PFAS chemicals in almost every case and set levels that are allowed in the drinking water, or rather a cutoff level, so that at which point you have to be provided with clean PFAS-free drinking water to protect Alaskans' health. Those bills are both in the Resources Committee. I have been working very closely with the Senate Resources Chair, and I'm optimistic we're going to get that bill moving here before too long. I know that Representative Hannon has been working closely with the chair of her committee as well. In fact, I talked to him in the hallway the other day. I need to bring you up to speed on that. So good prospects for that bill this year. With that, let me give the number again for those of you watching online. If you'd like to call and talk to us or ask a question, 586-9085. Or if you're not Juneau-based, 844-586-9085. With that, I see we've got another caller here to go to on the line, Shannon Adamson. Shannon, good evening. Go right ahead.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to ask questions. I actually have two questions. The first is, what sort of state match do you guys hear might be needed for the federal infrastructure funding in regards to AMHS? And the second one is, what are your three thoughts regarding building new ferries beyond the Tusty 2? I know the governor made a big deal about moving forward with the Tustamina 2, but I would argue that we need more than just that one vessel.
Shannon, this is Rep. Hannon. So on the first part of that question, if the question about federal match is with regard to the operational money, zero.
Yes. Zero. Okay.
That money is Congress no longer uses the term earmark, but it's program money that is described very specifically, and by our analysis, there's only two states that are even eligible to apply for it, and that's Alaska and Maine. And in Maine, it appears that only one of their routes is long enough that it qualifies. And it's a $200 million per year for 5 years. And there is no other federal match required to that. But what that does do is allow us to take this, fare box recovery and start the planning for design build of another vessel. Now, if I take off my legislative cap and go, I'm the queen of the world and I have a magic wand, how many new vessels do we need? Well, I think we need 5 new vessels. Maybe we need 6. We don't have the money to do that. So I guess I don't want, you work closer to it than me, so you tell me how many do we need, and then we've got to figure out how to fund them. And right now, as you know, the Tustamina's in that design phase, so we've got to get that funded and out on the water, and that takes another about 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So we want to get the ball rolling to start putting the money towards the planning for another mainline vessel before we lose another ship, before we don't have the capacity. But, the new MTAB board, they get to we've tried to establish that new board. That was, another piece of the reforms in the Alaska Marine Highway System that are a positive step over the last 2 years. They get to make some of those decisions or weigh in on them. And certainly over the 4 years of this administration, we've seen a very big difference in perception about the need and the critical nature of the Alaska Marine Highway System to the economy of Alaska. And it's not just coastal Alaska. So figuring out where the administration is, what they will support, as well as making sure that that MTAB board has the tools that they need to think about long-term planning. But I think when we look and assess those vessels, we need all of the vessels except for the 2 Alaska-class ferries and the Latuya that serves the Metlakatla-Ketchikan run. My understanding is all of the other vessels are at their end of life stages, and we need to replace them. Senator or Representative?
Yes, this is Rep. Andy's story again. I agree wholeheartedly with Representative Hannon how important how we spend this $1 billion over the next 5 years. It's going to be critical. We've a great opportunity, and we do need some 2 more mainliners at least to get in as part of that package over the next 5 years. And as you know, we have had a shortage of staff. It's not a surprise when you have such unpredictable hours to offer your staff, and the unreliable service and just unreliable respect from the system. I mean, I just have to say it's been really difficult the last few years having the disruptions in service. It's really hurt our families from getting together. It's our businesses. So I was just so glad to see everyone come together. And again, this is where people, they have, again, more power than we realize it. When we collectively come together, was just been an outpouring of support for the ferry systems over the last couple of years. And I really want to congratulate everybody out there because you have made a difference. And now we, as Rep. Hannon started out her comments, there's a bright light for our transportation system, our road down here in Southeast Alaska. So I just want to thank everybody for that work. And I am encouraged with the new operation board. I really want them to get a chance to work, and they've got some good people on there, and I'm hoping they're going to come up with a good plan. And when they ask for public comment, I have no doubt they're going to get good comments. So thank you for that question.
And I really would echo everything the 2 representatives said, except I think the Kennecott is only 28 years old. She's got a few years left in her. but otherwise, I have to agree all the way across. So let me give that phone number again. I know we have a couple of dozen folks watching who haven't called in. 586-9085 or 844-586-9085. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. We'd love to take another call. Representatives, did one of you have either an issue or a bill that you wanted to brief the people on? It's a big issue coming through.
Well, I thought we could, of course, go down the complicated road of elections, special elections, and more elections, and then overlay that with redistricting. So the election districts for 2022 have not yet, the borders of where they are not completely settled. Our district, the House districts that Representative Story and I currently represent in the next election cycle, and the maps that were challenged in court, and the Supreme Court heard them a week ago, those challenges, where the lines are drawn that make the 2 Juneau seats, and one of them always having some outlying communities, is not yet settled. I believe that the Senate boundaries are settled.
Feeling pretty good.
And we may not know the final decision on that, where the line will be and where exactly in town that line falls and which of the districts is the in town and out of town. Plus all the districts are being renumbered, so we're going to go from being District 33 and 34 to being Districts 3 and 4. But we don't know what they are. They have to be settled. Well, actually, June 1 is the filing deadline, and you have to know what districts you are because there's a geography element to being able to run in an election seat. the court can, my understanding, can either decide current maps, the existing maps could hold if they couldn't get new maps approved in time. So there's that. There's the redistricting element. We know that in 2020, the way we run elections was restructured through ballot measure 2 with an open primary, top 4 finishers in the primary going to the general that will be ranked choice. And then, of course, with the passing of Congressman Don Young last Friday and the requirement in state law that a replacement for a congressional House seat vacancy must be held no sooner than 60 days, no later than 90 days. And the governor has announced, the Division of Elections has announced today that the intention is the primary election for that special primary for that seat will be held on by June 11th, and that will be a total mail-in ballot because there is not time to set up 40 election districts voting locations. And then the second phase of that special elections general election will be on the same ballot on the primary election day on August 16th. So we'll have one seat, the congressional seat, for its 6-month term that would only go through January, on the ballot, where they're also holding the primary for that seat for a 2-year term, and all 59 other seats in the Alaska legislature, plus the gubernatorial race, plus one U.S. Senate seat. So elections this summer will happen June, August, and then again in November, and they will all be different than we've had in the past. So there'll be a lot of voter education that needs to occur over the next few months, and it'll be confusing. So we're going to need to spend some time making sure that people know it's not a corruption of the system. This is back to democracy is messy, and when people get a say in it, it doesn't always come out how you want it to, but that's what the rules are.
And I think it sometimes it sounds more complicated than it is when we try and get all the details. But the critical thing is, with the sad passing of Congressman Young, we're going to vote, as the representative said, 3 times this summer. First, we need to replace our Congress critter for the remainder of the term. So primary in June, and then in August, we'll vote to fill the rest of that term. At the same time, we'll start the process of picking our Congress critter for the next 2 years. And that'll follow the usual time frame. I see that we have one more caller on the line, and so I want to make sure we get to that caller before we wrap up tonight. John Pugh, thanks for joining us. Go right ahead.
Yes, hi, this is John Pugh, and I wanted to find out from Jesse, Senator, what are your thoughts on the possibility of both the increase in the student base going through the Senate as well as the money for the scholarship funding for the university? Because I heard what the House is doing, but I didn't hear what the Senate is doing and what's going on.
Well, thanks, John. I'm pretty optimistic that we will get a bump in K-12 education funding this year. I think there's going to be a lot of money around. We started with that piece of the conversation, and as Rep. Story has argued over and over and beaten that drum very effectively, costs are up in our schools, and we've got to accommodate that. We've got to account for that. Exactly what shape that takes, I can't predict yet. I'm pushing for an increase in the base student allocation in law so that it's in there and durable. There's always the fallback possibility of one-time funding, but again, that's tough for our schools, right? Not to be able to plan the following year for the same amount of money. The potential for a cut means they spend a lot of time they could spend organizing our schools and education on writing and rewriting and re-revising their budgets. So pushing hard for the base student allocation to go up. As far as the higher education investment fund, the whole legislature is having a hard time with the concept that it's better for us to use Wall Street earnings than it is to use tax money to do good stuff. In this case, the good stuff is the Alaska Performance Scholarship, the need-based grant, and the WWAMI program to train doctors to come to Alaska. But there are some cool heads around who understand that if you invest money and use the investment earnings to pay for those good programs that bring a return to Alaska, our economy, our people, our culture, that's cheaper than using tax money to do it each and every year. So I am guardedly optimistic that we are going to have some success getting the higher education investment fund restored. With that will probably be pieces like the Marine Highway System Fund and finding a way to save, as Representative Hannan kept talking about, the ticket money, the fare money that comes into the ferry system, in ways that they don't get swept into the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund. And I know, John, you understand that, but the nickel version for the general public, most folks who don't get elbow deep in the state budget, is that at the end of a year, if there's any money left in any accounts anywhere, it automatically goes into the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund, and that takes a supermajority to get back out. And there are only a few ways to prevent that from happening. They're not easy. We are looking at passing laws and changing the structure of things so that we can protect some of those funds, like we do the Power Cost Equalization Fund, same story, right? We can invest that money and use the investment earnings to pay for the things Alaskans need us to do as a state government. Decent chance of those things passing, but that work isn't done yet, so we continue to push on that on the Senate side.
All right. Thank you for answering the question. I appreciate it.
And I would like to add a comment too. I've started my visits over on the Senate side, talking about what the base student allocation increase would do for our students. And also, I again want to say that what's really going to make a difference about the Higher Education Investment Fund and increasing the base student allocation is representatives and senators hearing from their constituents all across the state. It really does make a difference when people pick up the phone and call their rep and speak up for what they feel is needed. And so there's a lot of issues before the Capitol representatives right now, and we really do think and would advise everyone to check in. And with your colleagues, your friends, family across the state, encourage them to call into their representatives about what is important to them, what essential services they would like to see. I know we're still looking at the amount of the permanent fund dividend, which is always a big issue. Right now, on the House side, we have a dividend of $1,250, which costs $800 million, and we have put forward a plan that we hope the Senate will be receptive to of funding an energy rebate. As we all know, there's high cost of energies right now, and that is $1,300 amount, and so we feel that will help families and individuals. And so that is what we're looking at. I did just want to briefly say that we have made a commitment in our House budget to school bond debt reimbursement, to fund that at 100%, and that saves, and community assistance payment, which could be over $3 million for our Juneau City municipality, and that's really important. So we've got some good pieces in the budget. We hope to get that budget, like I said, through the House next week and send it over to the Senate. But please, everyone, we just really do like to hear from you, and it's nice to have the Capitol open again. We've had a few people. It's been fun. We've had a lot of people in the building this week visiting, and so please, we'd like to see you up here. So thank you.
Representative?
Yes, thank you. It's a dreary night out there, but it is actually peak spring here at the Capitol building. We're hearing a lot of calls, we're seeing a lot of faces, but remember, so for instance, you don't need to call Representative Story and encourage her to support an increase in the base student allocation. She's leading the charge on that. So rattle the cages of your friends in districts north of us, because I know actually the members to the south of us also support the increase in the base student allocation. But when you speak to the person who you're in their election district, that carries the most influence. So making sure that your personal networks across Alaska are as engaged as Juneau and Southeasterners are, because we know in our district, our constituents are engaged. And we like hearing from you. We don't always get back to you the same day you let us know your opinion, but we are listening, and that's the good thing about Alaska. We are a big, small town, and we hear from each other, and even on a drizzly evening. Senator?
Well, that takes up our time tonight. Thank you so much for joining us in our wonderful state that is a small town. It's been a pleasure talking with you and taking your calls tonight. Please feel free to call us, email us. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again for joining us for our mid-session town hall. With that, we'll say goodnight and we'll be done.